So if we are ready,
okay.
Yeah. So next we have Matias Arim from the la Universidad de la República de Uruguay. That will talk us about COVID, and a theme that many of us are investigating now.
Okay, thank you.
Let's
thank
start.
you. Okay, thank you very much for the invitation, for being here. We have set an amazing set of talks. Well, this is another talk about COVID dynamic. Probably most of us assisted to several talks this year. I hope to bring you some knowledge insight. If not, I have to say that I'm not an epidemiologist. I was forced to work with COVID dynamics, and this is what I did this year, so I want to tell. Okay? Let's start talking about non-pharmaceutical interventions, a concept that I had not 1 year before. No? Non-pharmaceutical interventions are order interventions oriented to reduce the spread of disease. Now, typically, the barriers to vectors or pathogen transmissions could be nets to mosquitoes, could be the worldwide used mask this year. Also involve the social changes associated to stop the spread of disease, as could be the reduction in the number of contacts, social distance, also hygiene measures, but particularly important in this non-pharmaceutical intervention is the contact tracing. Essentially, the identification of infected people, the reconstruction of all the contact that these people have, this individual has during the period that he could transmit the disease, and the isolations of all the contact until confirmed of being infected or not. Non-pharmaceutical intervention has been widely used for the management of emergent disease worldwide. This is the case of yellow fever, malaria, influenza, Ebola, and in this year, of course, COVID-19. So this is a very important component of the management of disease in these times, but also in ancient times. Okay? However, it's amazing that the dynamic consequences of non-pharmaceutical intervention are indeed poorly understood. I will consider here 2 quotes. One of PIISCO in 2017, that he said that there is not currently systematic framework to assess the relationship between the different containment strategies and pharmaceutical intervention and the natural history of epidemics. Or one more strong assertion by Bloch co-author. They say that about pharmaceutical intervention, they have been often based on expert recommendation rather than scientific evidence. This means that there is not a strong understanding of the dynamic consequence of these interventions that are currently worldwide applied. What can we say about intervention? It became really evident that associating to interventions, the COVID dynamic presented 2 alternative states. One of containment, with the disease advancing at very low numbers, which was the case until the last weeks in Uruguay, and sometimes in Korea and other few countries, and a state of outbreak. That was the case of Argentina, Chile, and several countries around the world. This different state of containment and outbreak were related as well several times with the strength of non-pharmaceutical intervention. If these interventions are strong enough, the epidemic is contained. However, these 2 states were also observed among regions with this similar strength of non-pharmaceutical intervention, or even within the same country or population. Even having an increase in pharmaceutical intervention, the transition between outbreak and containment, or containment to outbreak, were observed. So there is something else that is happening here. In this context, we put the focus in a main feature, intrinsic characteristics of this intervention. It is that their effectivity is expected to wane as the number of infected individuals increase. A recent article showed that for non-household contacts, if you have contacts with more than one in your environment, with more than one people that is infected, the probability that you become infected is 4 times larger. And this is because the larger role of the virus in the environment reduces the effect of barriers as face masks, patient measure, and so on. Also, has been very well reported that with the increase in infection number, healthcare systems for COVID, but also for Ebola, for other diseases, become saturated and start to delay the isolation of cases or become with not enough material to protect the people. In addition, the tracking system also becomes saturated as the number of cases increase. The larger of number of infected cases that have to be analyzed by a tracer system, the less efficient the system is capturing these people, isolating these people, so the less important is the effect of the tracing system stopping the disease dynamic. It is very important to consider that all these features determine a positive feedback, particularly at low numbers, between the number of infected people and the disease growth rate. We are talking about that there is the conceptual scenario for an OLI effect, a positive relationship between disease growth rate and number of infected cases at low numbers, which is a very important feature in population dynamic, widely studied, for which we have a very strong framework. Starting with this idea, we translated three contribution or analysis in this frame. First, we made an attempt to formalize the connection between non-pharmaceutical interventions and the OLI effect. We showed that this could be done and formally predict this positive relationship between disease growth rate and number of infected cases, a transition between containment and outbreak, and a threshold in number of infected people to observe this transition. The second thing that we done was put this idea of OLI effect of non-pharmaceutical intervention induced OLI effect in a SIR model and showed that the main effect of this saturation is the acceleration of disease growth rate in a short period of time. And finally, we're going to show that this kind of acceleration predicted by the model is observed in COVID dynamic worldwide. Let me start with our best attempt to formalize the connections between non-pharmaceutical intervention saturation and the OLI effect. A main parameter in the epidemic is the effective reproductive number. With the R0 is the average number of second infection produced by infected people at the start of the epidemic. The R effective is this same value, the second infection, from an average individual, but in any context. For example, when you have 10, 100, or 1,000 people infected in the population. This R effective reproductive number without quarantine is determined by main three parameters, which are the probability that an infected individual has a contact with a susceptible individual, the probability that the disease, the infections, is transmitted in each one of the contacts, and the total number of social contacts that an infected person has during the period which he has the condition to transmit the disease. If nothing else happens without non-pharmaceutical intervention, that is the whole story. During the course of the infections, people have not the same probability of transmission of the disease. In the first days, transmission probability are very low, but as the day goes, the load of virus in the person rise, and so the probability of transmission rise, and the probability that the social contacts involve a risk contact for transmission also rise until a maximum achieved after 10, 20, 12 days of infections, and having a maximum number of contacts. This kind of dynamic could be modeled by a Hill equation, also with our alternative, but we focus on this one. The point to highlight here is that you had an increase in number of risk contacts with the days since you have been infected. With this idea, we can start to work with which is the expected R effective number for a person or a population of individuals that are put in quarantine. I talk about quarantine, we talk about quarantine, but we're talking about quarantine or isolation as with the same meaning here. Well, considering the tracer systems have limited capacities. They can do a fixed number of calls in each day, and each call has a probability of finding the person that they are looking for. In Uruguay, this number is about 0.8. So 4 or 5 calls find the person that they're looking for. And they have to find the person, a number fixed of person, in each day. So the probability of effectively finding this person will be given by this very simple equation. Essentially, this is the probability of not finding the person in a single call, the number of calls that you can make with your maximum number of calls in the days, and the number of persons that you have to contact. This is the probability of not finding the person. 1 minus this value is the probability of quarantine or isolate this person. And of course, the probability of quarantine the person one day D will be a distribution. You have the probability of not quarantine the person all the previous days times the probability of quarantine the person in this day. With this formula, we can estimate the expected number of connections that a quarantine person will have before become isolated, before is moved to quarantine. And this depends on the average days in which the person is moved to isolation. With this number, we can estimate an R effective in quarantine individuals, which will be, again, probability of susceptible links times the probability of transmission of the disease in each one of the links times a value of number of links that will be minor of the maximum number that could achieve a person that is not put in quarantine. The final component of the model is that not all individuals that are infected become detected to be quarantined. And this is because the tracer system has limited capacities. There are a fixed number of tracers. And this is having a fixed number of tracers implies that you have a fixed number of persons that you can quarantine or isolate in a day. And the management, the isolation of each one of the individual has a handling time. These are the main component of the type 2 functional response, in which tracers are predators that are attempting to capture and feed infected people. So a type 2 functional response, saturating functional response, in which the number of detected people saturate as the number of infected individuals increase, will be a good representation of the phenomenon. This will determine that depending on the number of infected people in the population, you will have a variable fraction of individuals that are put in quarantine, that are isolated, and a fraction of individuals that are not isolated. Quarantine individuals will have the R expected that we previously showed for this kind of behavior, and non-quarantine individual will have the other one. We differ essentially in the maximum number of links that they will achieve, which is a function of number of infected people. This very, very elementary function captures the main dimension, or we understand that capture the main dimension of the tracer system, which are the maximum number of contacts that the people achieve, the social restrictions, the existence of barriers to the pathogen transmissions, and the number of infected people in the population. So if we go back to this formula that represents the expected reproductive number without non-pharmaceutical intervention, the per capita rate of increase as a function of the number of infected people progressively decreased with the number of infections. So with case isolation, per capita rate of increase in the population, in infected population, decreased as the number of infected people follow as logistic dynamic. The classical, this is one of the reasons because the logistic dynamic could be used to forecast epidemic dynamics. But with few infections, the outbreak takes place. This means that without non-pharmaceutical interventions, the introduction of 2, 3, 4 infected people in the population will determine an outbreak. However, non-pharmaceutical interventions generate a significant change in this relationship. First of all, the epidemic does not take off at low numbers. There is a range of infection numbers at low numbers in which the epidemic is contained, has a negative growth rate in time. In addition, it shows the existence of a positive feedback, in which the larger the number of infected people in the population, the larger the growth rate of this of the infection, of the disease that the disease can have. And also, the potential existence of an infection threshold, a number of infected people in the population in which a significant change in the dynamic of the disease is expected, a change from containment to outbreak. This relationship, as we said, capture the main components of the contact tracing of the non-pharmaceutical intervention systems, capturing the effect of tracing capacity, tracing the speed, reflecting the number of calls, hygiene measure, representing the barrier and the probability of transmissions in each social connection, and social distances, determined by the maximum number of connections that the people achieve during the time in which, in the course of the infections. In the y-axis of each one of these plots, we have the proportion of infected people in the population. The blue area here represents these conditions in which the epidemic has negative growth rate, and the red area here represents conditions for the outbreak in which the epidemic will take off. The lower border represent the unstable equilibrium, represent the threshold for epidemic occurrence, and the upper border is an stable equilibrium, which represents the existence of herd immunity. The epidemic cannot largely grow in the population. In a gradient of the strength of all these non-pharmaceutical interventions, the transition in the x-axis between outbreak and containment is expected. This means that if not pharmaceutical interventions are strong enough, the containment of the epidemic is possible, and a transition between containment and outbreak is expected. This was suggested as well several times this year. However, what was not a focus in attention, particularly in models, but not so much in the healthcare system that consider this scenario, you also have a transitions in the containment outbreak state, determined by the fraction of infected people in the population. And this was a component that was missing in several or most of the models that were used to the analysis of COVID dynamics. Our second objective is having some formalization of the connection between pharmaceutical intervention and the early effects was to advance on the dynamic consequence, on the mean feature of the dynamic consequences of this non-pharmaceutical intervention induced early effect. And we will show that the main effect is an acceleration in the dynamic. If you have a deterministic system without noise, and you have this interaction between disease dynamic and non-pharmaceutical intervention, the expected outcome, are fixed, is fixed, and are two. Now, if you are here, you will show an exponential or similar dynamic, if you are a growing dynamic, and if you are here, you will show an exponential decreasing dynamic, and that's the end of the story. However, what changed the dynamic between these states are the random variation. The random variation in the flow of infection, it's a stochastic process, of course, but also the random variation in immigration of infected people to the local population. And particularly important, and recognizing that's important, this is the existence of super spread events. Days in which some individuals generate a very large number of second contacts or a very large number of infection, arriving new infection take place. So we consider that the most basic feature to represent the dynamic of COVID systems is the one that consider these points. In particular, that individuals recover and become resistant. So the zero model, epidemic model, the way they use the zero model will be the most basic model to consider, as was also used by Robert Holt in a recent article. Of course, we want to introduce non-pharmaceutical intervention induced all effect and focus in the change in dynamic because of him. We also consider that it's relevant for give the dynamic the opportunity to be sub-exponential. Most of the dynamic of COVID around the world, or several of the dynamic of COVID around the world, does not take off exponentially, but with a dynamic that is terrible, is positive, but has not reached, is not as fast as is expected for an exponential dynamic. It was very well reported in several papers. I highlight here one that we use a lot of Meyer and Brookman inside. This is the deterministic component of the model. The stochastic component, we consider immigration that have to be considered for the arrival of the disease and eventually the move between alternative state, super spread events, and stochastic flows. We worked with a discrete time model, SIR model. I like discrete models. And it's the classical SIR model in which you have 3 compartments and a rate of move between compartments. Beta is the rate of infection. Gamma is the number of days that a person is infected and transmitting the disease. Susceptibilities are depleted by new contagions, which move to infected people, that some fraction of the people is recovered, but also you have the number of imported cases or a number of new individuals came in from a super spread event. And of course, resistant people is recovery people. Okay? The new infections were considered as the result of a Poisson distribution in which the expected value is the rate of transition, which as we will see is a function of number of infected people, time the infected people elevated to P. This accounts for the sub-exponential dynamics. It's an approach widely used in the Breffen, Meyer and Brockman, and several others to account for this deviation from exponential and susceptible people in the population. The number of imported cases, we consider that follow a negative binomial distribution that essentially consider the parameters that we explored, essentially produce no imported cases or no super spread events most of the day. But in some days, it produces several cases. For example, you have 0, 0, 0, 10, or 0, 0, 0, 20 number, this kind of dynamics, which quite well represents the reported trend in super spread events in COVID. Finally, in order to introduce the NPI-induced early effects, we consider that the rate beta and the number of days a person is transmitting the disease are a function of the number of infected people. If you have few infected people in the population, this parameter, beta and gamma, are very, very small. But as the number of infected people also rise the maximum rate of contagion and also rise the days that a person is infected. So with this contextualization, with this basic idea about the main feature of COVID dynamic, we contrasted the dynamic of systems with or without the Ollier effect, MPI-induced Ollier effect. Our focus of analysis in the rest of the talk is about this component of the dynamic, that is the growth in the total number of cases a long time. To this dynamic, we fit a segmented regression that, as we will see, do a very good job capturing the essence of this dynamic, right? In which you have a segmented regression with a breakpoint and a linear increase before and a linear increase after the dynamic. If you have super spread events, but you don't have Ollier effect, you will find some changes in the rate of case accumulation, but they're not qualitative large changes in the dynamic of the system. However, on the other hand, when you introduce an Ollier effect in parameter, the expected consequence is an abrupt acceleration in disease growth rate at a given moment of time. So in a few days, you have a qualitative change in the rate of advance of the epidemic. We take a very large time to find a way to resume this different behavior. And also we were looking for a way to resume this behavior and be contrasted with empirical data. We finished with this approach that was good enough for us, but probably there is some alternative to consider. In this plot, we have the slope before the break in the dynamic, and in the x-axis, sorry, and in the y-axis, you have the rate, the relative increase in the rate of advance in the dynamic. In green, you have the density plot of 500 simulations of model with parameters congruent with COVID dynamic, but without Ollier effect. And in red or brown, you have the dynamics, the expected dynamic in system with Ollier effect. The main message to take is that Ollier effect expands the range of dynamics in which you may have a situation where the disease have a long period without a significant or with a very slow rate of increase in the population, but a sharp transition to an abrupt acceleration and a fast rate of change in the population. With this idea, we move to data, which is, in this terrible time, is one of the amazing things about COVID. That's you have huge amount of, comparatively with other ecological series, very good data. And then here we will show how this kind of acceleration is observed in COVID dynamic worldwide. To the same, we focus in the dynamics of COVID in 552 US counties and 125 countries. These were the time series in which the epidemic in some moments surpassed, I think it was 100 infected individuals that was arrived to the population at least 2 weeks before and surpassed also the 10 number of infected people. We focus in this period of the series because we are interested in the takeoff of the disease, and with excluding low numbers, we avoided observe a root transition that was probably related to random variation and not to the phenomenon that we were interested to capture. Here we say that fitted a segmented regression to the increase in the total number of cases in log scale and the day since the beginning of the epidemics, also in log scale, made a very good job capturing the dynamic. Okay? Typically, this segmented regression has an explained variant of very, very close to 1. So we capture it. It's an approach that captures some relevant feature of the dynamic. Okay? What we done was plot the observed slope the rate of increase of disease at the beginning of the epidemic in all the countries and all the countries that we have data, and the rate of acceleration, or the rate of change in the slope of cumulative cases after the breakpoint. What we see, there are two things. Forgetting for a moment about the serum models, you have that several dynamic show an abrupt transition with periods of very slow advance in the population and a transition to a very fast increase in the dynamic of the epidemic. Further, both for countries, the observed break in the dynamic, the observed tipping point or something similar in the dynamic, were much congruent with models with NPIs induced oil effect that the model that not consider this component, this saturation of non-pharmaceutical intervention. And this was so for a very large set of combination of plausible parameters for all the parameters involved in the serum model. Systematically, the models with oil effect do a much better work capturing this component of the dynamic than models without the oil effect. Okay. So, summarizing the conceptual part of the talk, that we have is that NPIs are effective in containing disease, are worldwide used, but has as an intrinsic property that they saturate. And this saturation involves a positive feedback in disease growth rate at low number, which is essentially an oil effect. Starting with this conceptualization, we try to formalize this idea, showing that capturing the main feature of non-pharmaceutical intervention, you induce an oil effect in disease dynamic. With this model, we related different dimensions of non-pharmaceutical intervention with alternative state and or the existence of a threshold number of infected to outbreak. We explored the main dynamic consequence, which is an abrupt acceleration in disease growth rate, and we showed that several dynamics worldwide has presented this kind of acceleration. To end the talk, let me consider a few main messages for the management of COVID-19 dynamic that are related with the existence of an oil effect and are not so relevant if this effect is not involved. First of all, timing is essential. Reactive measure, the strength of non-pharmaceutical intervention, lockdown, bubbles, social bubbles, tracer, global maps, and so on, in a reactive fashion, when the disease grows in numbers and things goes wrong, have a comparatively poor capacity of revert this scenario. However, a proactive intervention before the number surpasses the infection threshold has the potential to contain the epidemic. And the difference between these consequences of non-pharmaceutical interventions could be days. I should say, in Uruguay, very, very strong non-pharmaceutical interventions were implemented the very first day that COVID was detected. And as a consequence, we have 8 months with dynamic at low numbers, one of the few countries worldwide that persisted in this blue area for a very long period of time, until the last weeks. The second point to highlight is that there is a process of diminishing returns. If we don't have non-pharmaceutical interventions, we have the outbreak, whatever the number of individuals that are infected individuals that arrive to the population. When we implement non-pharmaceutical interventions, we generate, or this safe area with containment of the disease is generated. And you can start to strengthen your non-pharmaceutical intervention. For example, in Uruguay, you may start with this, considering this idea by the government. There was a strong increase in the tracer capacities. However, there was not a consequent support by the people in terms of reduced social contacts. So at the beginning of the epidemic, we have an average number of 5, 6 contacts by infected individuals. Now we have 25 and some days 40 average number of contacts by infected individuals. This is, in this plot, we see here the number of social contacts, here the fraction of infected individuals in the population. And the red area is reducing with a proportional increase in the number of tracers that are working in the system. At the beginning, when you introduce the tracer, you observe a large change in the blue area on the red area. You increase your safe area. However, with the same increase, when you have just implemented the system and have several people working in the system, has a small effect in changing the condition or improving the containing capacity of the disease. We are here now in Uruguay. So if we are working, increasing the tracer system, but if the people don't reduce the number of social contacts, this component of the containment by non-pharmaceutical intervention have a minor role, probably, on revert the actual situation. Also related with the existence of diminishing return is to highlight the role of combining intervention, which is probably essential. We cannot put all the effort in one of the dimensions of containment. Some level of intervention by reducing number of contacts, by increasing tracer capacity, by improving hygienic measures, could have a very large effect in containing the epidemic, or the other side of the same coin. It becomes difficult to compensate for the absence of one intervention, for example, large number of contacts, increasing other intervention, as is the case of the number of tracers. This is the situation now in Uruguay. The final point to highlight, of course, is that when you have an epidemic threshold, the relaxation of intervention should be considered in attention to tipping point. If you are here in the I situation, okay, and you relax the strength of non-pharmaceutical intervention, for example, increasing the number of social contacts or reducing the tracer capacities, and you cross the epidemic threshold, you will experience an increase in the epidemic numbers. When you react to this increase in epidemic number back to the original level of strength in non-pharmaceutical interventions, the same intervention that were effective 1 week before just are not largely capable of stop the disease. However, the ideal work is one in which you are relaxing the strength of your non-pharmaceutical intervention with attention to reduction in proportion of infected people and with attention of not crossing the epidemic threshold. To this same, early warning indicators become particularly relevant, and the ones that we find to monitor were the delay in report of or infection, delay in report to isolation or infection to isolation, the number of tests by positive cases, and the fraction or the total number of infected people that came without epidemiological links. This number in Uruguay has been growing in a horrible manner all the last weeks. So we probably crossed the tipping point and are in a very bad situation now. The final point to consider or to talk, it's about all our attempt to formalize the connection between non-pharmaceutical interventions and oil effects could be wrong. The approach to capture the disease dynamic with non-pharmaceutical intervention could be wrong. But the saturation of non-pharmaceutical intervention from low number to the rise in number of infected people is probably a preponderant feature of this intervention for several of the emergent disease. And this involves a positive feedback, and all we know the huge consequence of positive feedbacks in dynamics. In particular, we show how super spread events that are a main component of disease dynamic, widely recognized in the last years, but the effect of these events could strongly interact with the existing of oil effect. But besides this, well, it's very well known that the existence of oil effect could have huge consequences in terms of pattern formation and persistence of populations in the landscape, the emergence of abrupt limits even in continuous space, also has consequence in the temporal spatial stability and dynamic of population, has been related with different strain consistence of pathogens, has been also related with selection profiles in which the assistance with early effect is assistance in which traits related to larger dispersal capacities could be positively selected. And in general, as Taylor and Hastings says, almost all models and all analyses that evaluated the early effect predict a qualitative different dynamic in system with or without early effect. So probably there is a feature to further consider in the management of emergencies. Early effects, positive feedback, tipping point also connect with very well-established theoretical framework as phase transition, tipping point, critical transition, and to a feature that for us was not so knowledge and is most concentrated in a specific literature, that is the idea of backward bifurcation induced by non-pharmaceutical intervention or similar measures, which is essentially the same phenomenon that we were talking about. That is that when you implement some intervention, you move the conditions for epidemic and you have two alternative states in some situation. This work is actually some weeks ago under review in the Proceedings of the Royal Society, after it was not reviewed in PNS, and it's available in medARCs. It's a work that I did with an amazing team of people. No one of us were working on epidemics until this year. And these people that work in physics, mathematics, neurology, even psychology, and move to try to contribute to the management of fluid dynamics in Uruguay, and are amazing and very smart people. We also have several deliveries that we send to the government and to the public that are in this web page, and as I said, the main arcs of the article. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias.
So thank you very much. Excellent talk. Enlightening talk. So anybody has questions?
Yes, I do have a question.
Okay.
Or maybe it's a very naive one, but when I saw that you compare many countries, I was wondering how do these models or how do you deal with the different data collection methodologies on these different countries, and how you kind of put this together in a comparable way?
We didn't. And the contribution there is the mass of evidence. There is noise, there is deviation, but over all the source of variation that you have along the data sets, you have this recurrent feature worldwide, which is there is an abrupt acceleration in several time series. You have variation in the time when this acceleration is observed. We find a systematic increase in the rate and in the time of the breaking point with population size. So some of the variation related to that. But it's amazing that over all this variation in the natural history of the systems that are invaded, all this variation in the collection, this is a recurrent feature. So the disease frequently show a very variable period of containment, and then in 1 day, 1 week, you have a transition to another regimen in which you have a constant rate of increase, a very larger rate, and this is sustained in another period of time. We made some attempts to relate the variation in dynamics with the strength of non-pharmaceutical intervention. For US counties, this information is very well available. It will be done. But we didn't find the kind of evidence that we were looking for, honestly. No, very strong. There is a large room to work on. But the short answer is that in spite of this source, all the source of variation, there is some recurrent feature in the dynamic, and this mean feature is no invariant, but observed as well.
Okay. Another question is there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I have some questions. But one of these questions is like, I don't see very well which were the early warnings that one of these is the delay in reported cases. Or how do you know that? Because I know that, but after.
No, we have the data the tracer system detect an infected individual and have the day in which he or it initiated symptoms. This is the first day, and you have the day that this individual was isolated. Okay, if you have that isolated. Okay, you said they call the individual and say you was in contact with an infected person. You have to become isolated, and so we have the day. So in good times, this day was negative. The people was isolated before the first day of symptoms. In worst day today, this value is positive and large. So we lose the battle, essentially.
This is isolation by the tracing system or by people itself?
It's isolated by the tracer system. Now we are trying to do a public information campaign for self-isolation, because self-isolation is the only intervention that not saturates, because it's proportional to the number of infected people. So as the number are growing, self-isolation is moving to the first line of battle in stopping the COVID. But we are having problems with this campaign, are very slow, and COVID is very fast.
And what were the others early warning?
The number or fraction of people without knowledge of contact. You have a person that feel bad and say, I was with no one that was infected, but I is infected. So you have a fraction of people that came from community circulation. In good day, this number was almost 0 in Uruguay. So you have all the cases, you have an idea where they came from. Now this value is around 30% and growing. So you have the disease is running away. And which was and the rate of the relationship between the number of tests that you can do in relation to the number of infected people. This number in Uruguay was 200 to 300. This number in Argentina is 2.
No, you're wrong. No, it's impossible.
I have a paper about that. So we had 100 more tracing capacities. So far, the disease not grow. When this happened now. So when you have a lot of capacity of detect infected individuals, you do the thing very well. When the number of Argentina is the same of Costa Rica, of Chile, of Brazil, but it's the numbers of the relationship between tests and infected people that you have when the epidemic takes off. So it's a very there is an index proposed by Harvard that is when this fraction surpass some threshold, you are crossing colors from green, yellow, orange, red. And we have been crossing one every 4 days, one of them the last week. So it has been terrible time for us. And trying to implement containment measure, not reactive. But, I think that besides that, I am fascinated because there are many things about the Oli effect and pattern formations and disease dynamic that could be analyzed, because you have data about the epidemic in almost every point of the world. So there is room for funny things to work with all the quotes.
That's right. Yeah. Initially, we tried to help in some ways, but I don't know if politicians don't allow too much help from us.
Yes, indeed. I was first involved. That I leave the idea because we have no connection with the government, and then there was implemented a direct connection with the government that worked until thing goes wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely understand that. Okay. The other thing that could be interesting for me is to try to calculate the delay in that. For example, we have low numbers now, but we are starting to relax too much. So how much time we take into the relaxation and the new outbreak, so the new wave? This is an interesting.
I have not. I will love to have, but I have not the magic number. But
of course.
But I think we think quite a lot about that these monitor variables, the delay in isolation, the fraction of community transmission, have to go down every day. If you have 3-4 days with this number rising, it's quite probably that you will have a rise some days. In some days you will have some outbreak or an increase in a reversion. Probably there are more. There's a topic in which all of us have to think a lot, but probably early warning indicators of the loss of pharmaceutical intervention capacities are the first ones that you can detect about a problem. Now, indeed, in Uruguay, this was observed 1 month ago. 1 month ago, we start to see this trend, this increasing time, this increasing fraction, and not revert, and was not reverted, and not because we have cycles during all the period, also related with the intervention, with some also modeled that, but never back. Yeah. Numbers start to rise, and
oh, well, okay. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your time and your attention.
Okay, so if you don't have any more questions, we have a next talk by Pilar that is not here. Or is it here?
One hour.
12:13, so half an hour. In half an hour, we have the long interval now, and in half an hour we have the talk also about COVID from Pilar Fernandez. So we will do the lunch interval for us, the lunch interval. Thank you very much to all. We'll see you later.